So this deal that I did, it was a 120-day closing, and we put a clause in there or a condition that if the tenant wasn't out by 90 days from that date, or roughly, that we would still proceed to close, but at X price.
Right.
So we chopped that price down by like 50 grand or whatever it was on a $800,000-$900,000 property. Welcome to episode 347 of the Real Estate Podcast. Today we're talking about what to look out for if you're buying a property that's tenanted. Let's go.
Welcome to the Real Estate Podcast, your go-to source for raw, unfiltered stories and expert tips. Whether you're a buyer, seller, tenant, landlord, or realtor, join us as we dive into the world of real estate.
Or is it going to be expert advice?
Both raw, unfiltered stories and expert advice. Why did you move my mic, Robbie? It feels uncomfortable. I feel like...
I think you're too far from it.
Yeah, it's very low. It was probably covering my face. That'll be his answer.
That's what I did. I moved mine down too. I kind of like it.
Plus, my voice projects better than yours.
I don't think so.
Pretty sure.
Okay.
This is part two.
Part two in our two-part series of buying or selling a house that's tenanted. And today we are talking about, from the buyer's perspective, things to know, things to consider, ways to protect yourself. Welcome.
Welcome. That's your segue.
Yeah.
I gotta say, first and foremost, there's a lot of deals right now to be had.
Well, you told me about an article
with buying tenanted properties.
You told me an article about somebody, I don't remember who or which organization, but people buying up condos in bulk.
Oh, yeah. But that, I think, pertains to new construction more so than resale.
Oh, got it.
But if we look at history, in the United States, when there was a similar dip, well, not quite the crash, but just after their market crash, there were a lot of big companies that went and bought hundreds and big celebrities that went and bought tons and tons of rental properties because they were buying them at a deep discount and just held on to those investments.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the condo market's never been more saturated as long as I can remember. And if you look at those listings, the vast majority of them are tenanted or vacant. And it's primarily because in many cases, landlords can't afford them anymore. The carrying costs are too high. The rent has come down.
Right. And every month that it doesn't sell, it's just costing them more money. So sometimes it's better to take your loss now, pull off the Band-Aid.
Well, like we were saying before, if you have somewhere you think that money would be better utilized, maybe another investment, then it might make sense to do that. And then, so it's not just condos though, like nowadays, and especially the newer neighborhoods, I'd say that are built within the last 5 years, certainly, many of those have finished basement apartments, right? Builders are intentionally building them to accommodate it.
Yep.
And homeowners are doing it to offset and help with their carrying costs. So it's not just condo buyers, it's everyone that's considering to buy a home. If there's an apartment in it, things to be aware of. And I would say this, I can't speak for outside of the province. So certainly in Ontario, the risk is, and the concern is from a buyer's perspective, that when you move in, you get the keys, the tenant's still there and you can't move in.
And you have to plan accordingly.
Yes. Is that the end of the podcast?
No. Okay. So a couple of things that I think are important as a buyer when you're looking at those type of properties. is give yourself even more leverage by, first of all, getting your financing in order. So if you can, you go in with an offer that doesn't have a finance condition.
What does that have to do with buying a tenanted property?
Well, it gives you more leverage in a market where...
You're just trying to say how to get a good deal on the property.
Yeah, if you're a buyer.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Isn't that what we're fucking talking about?
Well, that's not where my mind went with the topic, but it's part of the process.
Where's your mind with the topic?
No, you're ahead of me, I suppose. I'm thinking more of the risk of the tenant not leaving.
Yeah.
And the risk to the buyer.
Okay,
that
but
they have
your
no
risk
home
is
to move
mitigated
into.
if you get a damn good price on the place.
Well, not if they have nowhere to live.
Take the $20,000 you just shit off the price by not having a finance condition and get yourself an Airbnb for 60 days or 90 days.
It'll take 6 months to get the tenant out.
Fine.
If they can leave. There's been cases
Go
where
on a
tenants
cruise.
There's been cases where tenants were told they didn't have to leave.
Okay, well, then you got yourself a good investment property. What can I say?
And you're living on the streets.
Yeah, maybe.
So the standard clause, but yeah, I mean, to your point though, with these tenanted properties, they're not as appealing to most buyers. So
Right.
Immediately the sellers have a smaller pool of buyers,
100%.
which means you have a bigger opportunity to get a good deal.
Correct.
Which, air quote, because, what's a good deal if the market's going up or down? Who knows?
Market price is based on what somebody's willing to pay.
So based on a good deal on that day, because the market fluctuates that
But you want to give
frequently.
yourself every opportunity to, if you are the one that's going to be buying and dictating the market, and you're setting now the new market price, don't you want to give yourself as much leverage as possible to bring that price down as low as possible? So if you're the landlord and I'm the buyer, and I come to you with two offers, let's say the place is worth $500,000. Offer number one is for $500,000, conditional for 5 business days on financing, conditional for 5 business days on a home inspection. We'll say it's a condo, conditional for 10 business days, 7 business days on the review of a status certificate. If I'm the buyer and the buyer's agent and I order the status certificate or review it prior to the offer, and I've got my financing in order, and we brought our moisture meter, we had a look at it, there's no foundation, there's no attic, it's just the walls that surround you. We look under the kitchen sink, the plumbing, check all of that, everything looks pretty good, and you say, okay, yeah, I'm willing to sacrifice not having a home inspection because what's the worst that can happen, and I'm willing to eat any of the costs that might arise from any deficiencies. So now I come to you with an offer of $480,000, but it's a firm deal.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you look at that firm deal pretty favorably in this market?
Well, in a market where you're probably not getting any offers.
Right.
Yeah. After they've been on the market for 3 months.
So you just save yourself $20,000.
I'd be a bit more aggressive than that.
I'm just being realistic.
But
to that point,
yeah,
which offer could be more aggressive in the negotiation, right?
Certainly the one that's cleaner.
So the one with fewer conditions all of a sudden now say, okay, I'll give you a firm deal, but it's for $430,000.
But you're done today.
But you're done.
You put a sold sign up.
And choose your closing date.
Yes.
You want me to close in 60 days when the tenant's gone? Fine. Gone or not gone? We don't even know.
That brings up a point that's important. And that is, let's say you're buying this for personal use and you need to move in. And in Ontario, you have to provide 60 days notice to a tenant for them to be evicted. And it's not 60 days to the day. It's actually the end of the rental period that 60 days falls within. So
it could be 75 days.
Could be 75, could be almost 90 days.
Right.
So just to explain that, because some people may not quite understand it, is let's say it's March 3rd and you provide notice, 60 days notice to a tenant, which puts you to like May 2nd.
To the landlord.
The landlord provides notice to the tenant. So let's say that 60 days puts you to May 2nd. If this person pays the first of each month, the earliest you can evict them is May 31st. Right. So that's your consideration with closing. And now, when you're buying a tenanted property, you want to include a clause to protect you in the event, one, to make sure that the landlord follows the requirements of how to evict the tenant and they file the appropriate notices. And the standard clause, though, that a lot of agents use, it's a standard written clause that we all have access to. It's worded in such a way that basically says if the tenant doesn't leave, the buyer will become a landlord and they will take on the responsibility of the tenant.
Right.
So you can
you still have to close on the property
based on that.
Yeah.
But you can reword it. You can reword it to say, if the tenant has not left by such and such date, the deal's null and void and the buyer gets the deposit back in full.
It becomes a condition.
Yes. So you can, depending on your risk tolerance.
Or you can push back closing.
Yeah, you could have a way to push back closing, or you can have it worded in such a way where the landlord would take on responsibility of any costs involved with evicting the tenant.
Yep. I've done it before where we went with 120-day closing and they were to provide notice, and I actually provided the forms and the proper protocol to the realtor because I wasn't confident that they even knew how to do it properly.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing too, right? Like some landlords just shoot over an email to the tenant saying, well, you got to be out in 60. They don't go through the proper channels. So this deal that I did, it was an 120-day closing, and we put a clause in there or a condition that if the tenant wasn't out at that by 90 days from that date or roughly, so we left a buffer between when the tenant was supposed to be out and when the closing was going to be. And if they weren't out by that point, that we would still proceed to close, but at X price.
Right.
So we chopped that price down by like 50 grand or whatever it was on a $800,000, $900,000 property. So if that tenant wasn't gone in 90, 100 days and we were closing 20 days out, now the price has been modified.
Yeah. Well, then the landlord is quite motivated to get rid of the tenant.
Exactly.
But the risk there for the landlord is the landlord has very little control over it.
Correct.
Right? So then it goes to the landlord-tenant board and that process begins. So my suggestion to landlords would be, in the event you're selling a tenanted property, once you're able to provide the eviction notice, do it immediately. And then immediately file the L2 form, which is basically you.
Why didn't you talk about this in the last episode?
I don't know. Which is basically the landlord. So let me start over. So if a landlord's selling a property that's tenanted, as soon as they're able to file the eviction notice, they should do it immediately, which is basically as soon as they have a firm deal and the buyer has indicated that they want to move in for personal use. And you should also immediately file the L2, which is essentially booking an appointment or a hearing. This is assuming, you pay a little bit of money for this, but this is basically you are proactively booking a hearing in the event the tenant doesn't leave, instead of waiting to find out if the tenant leaves.
Yeah, because if you wait now, you could easily be months out.
Easy.
Although, I got to say, they are catching up after the whole COVID thing. Yeah.
It's still several weeks, though. So you're better to book that immediately and hope the tenant moves. But if they don't, then at least you've already booked your hearing and things proceed a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Or negotiations begin and you got to try to buy the tenant out, which is sometimes what happens. But as a buyer, you have to, one, make sure there's a clause in there that addresses the tenant being there and what happens if they don't leave.
Well, we're selling a property right now where there's tenants in there that have been there for years and years and years and years. Right?
Oh, yes. I was trying to think of the listings, which one you're talking about. I think I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, they don't want to go anywhere.
Right. Which is, it can be looked at two sides.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're paying their bills on time and they're taking care.
Well, that's an investment property though.
Yeah.
Like the buyer of that's.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The buyer is not looking to move in themselves for sure. It's an investment property.
Yeah.
But, if you're a landlord and here's the guaranteed income and these people take care of the place. They've been there for years. They don't want to ever leave. Well, that's fine, you know?
Well, I've had cases too where buyers submitted offers, but it included no clause, no mention of the tenants, even though it was a discussion point, and they knew tenants were there. Their agent didn't think to include anything to indicate what direction they wanted to go with the tenants being there. In one case I had where it was a basement apartment and the basement was rented and there was nothing. And then, weeks later they came and said, okay, well, we've decided we want the tenant to leave. Look, it's not that easy.
Right.
So you have to address this up front. So if you're buying a tenanted property, make sure you have clauses in the agreement to address what happens with the tenant. One, whether they can stay or leave. And two, if they don't leave, what happens? Does the deal fall apart? Do you get a reduced rate? Does the closing get extended? Does the landlord take full responsibility financially to evict the tenant? What happens?
And in that, you may want to make yourself privy to the existing lease agreement.
Yeah, for sure.
And what is the tenant responsible for paying? Utilities? What insurance coverage do they need to have? Was there a standard lease agreement signed? Were there any schedules or amendments to that agreement?
Yeah.
Have they been paying? How have they been paying? Have they been paying on time? Like, do the due diligence so you know what potentially you're getting yourself into.
Well, through Renty, we've had several properties we've taken over where the landlords had no paperwork.
Right.
They couldn't find agreements. In some cases, they had photocopied versions of lease agreements that were cut off and crucial information was missing, like who's responsible for hydro.
Good luck going to the landlord tenant board with that.
Yeah, no, it's...
Anyway, some great deals out there if you are a buyer of any kind.
Yes.
An investor, or you're looking for, like, I think if I was a first-time home buyer right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking to a lot of these tenants.
If I was a first-time home buyer right now, I would be specifically looking for a tenanted property.
Mm-hmm.
Something that maybe needs, the saying lipstick on a pig.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe it needs paint job. Maybe it needs a deep clean. Maybe it needs a little bit of TLC, little maintenance, maybe a new furnace, a new AC, whatever.
Well, I'd be narrowing my search to tenanted properties or vacant properties
that have been on the market for a long time.
Been on the market for a long time, and the listing doesn't look very good.
Right.
And you will find some desperate sellers.
Yeah. Add the twist in there where if the listing doesn't look very good, mating it with a realtor that may have taken a discount commission.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have a lot
not a good salesperson. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't have a lot invested into it. They're not spending a lot of time in marketing it. So they don't really care what it sells for. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
As long as it sells, you take that magic combination there, and there are some deals.
Mm-hmm. Maybe even
I'm gonna do one probably in the next 3-4 weeks. So I'll report back because that's exactly what we're out searching for.
Maybe even go as far as finding out when they bought it, because you'll find people. I mean, it's sad, but you'll find people.
Right, you bought it in February of 2022.
Right,
and all of a sudden you're selling it, and it's been on the market for 120 days.
Yeah,
and it's vacant.
They need to sell.
Come to mama.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for the chat.
Good chat.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to episode 347 of the Real Estate Podcast. We'd love to get your feedback, hear your comments, and do us a solid and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. 78% of you that watch are not currently subscribed. So show us some love and hit that subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it. We'll see you next week.